I'll briefly open up and then take questions. Obviously, two things I wanted to touch on. Obviously, the revenue estimating conference met today. While we did see a reduction in the revenue for this year's budget that we're working on, we did, as I've been saying, even since last year, we understood that when we were making the decision we did on a reduction with our taxes, that we knew that that was going to be a potential thing that would come from reducing taxes. I think the good news that we did see for the upcoming year in 27 is we did see a 5% increase in the projection for the out year. So I think we've seen that impact that we planned for by having a large ending balance taxpayer relief fund, and I think we're hopeful that as we see the optimistic outlook for 27, that continues to take effect. We've prepared for it, and we feel confident that we can make our budget work as having that tax cut in place. The other thing that I just touch on a bill we did this week that I thought was extremely important, as I've talked to our medical communities across the state with the doctor shortage that we're seeing, we passed a bill to try to make sure that we're giving more opportunities to Iowa students. The reason that bill I think is so important is as we've had conversations all across the state, we've seen higher likelihoods of students doing residencies in the state of Iowa, staying in Iowa. We know we have a worker shortage in several areas. The medical field is one of them that's very significant and important to us, and so we passed that bill earlier in the week. That was one of the things that we wanted to focus on in the beginning of session as part of our conversation around workforce, especially when we look at the doctor shortage we have in Iowa. So I'll just share those two things and open it up at that.
Mr. Speaker, with the revenue estimates, it seems clear that you'll have to use some of those ending balances potentially for the next few years to make up that difference. Is that your expectation? And if so, how long do you expect that could last?
Well, I won't make any predictions on what the following years. You know, we get that initial 27 estimate, which we felt was important to have as far part of our projection as we outlook. Again, that has 5% growth built into what the current number is for 27. When we passed the tax cuts, and I think we were very transparent about it, there's a reason we built up a significant, nearly $4 billion within the taxpayer relief fund. We also left ourselves the $2 billion roughly in the ending balance, knowing that as you're reducing taxes, you could see some short-term loss of revenue. So we made all those decisions with that in mind. So we feel like we're in a very strong position to be able to still meet our requirements and our commitments through the budget process because we had such what I consider an overpayment of tax money from the taxpayers.
So just to confirm, you will have to use some of the savings essentially for the budget.
I think that was always part of the plan as we were looking at. That's part of why we also put mechanisms in place to utilize some of that taxpayer relief fund. If you remember when we were having those conversations about the reduction in our tax revenue that we knew we would probably have from lowering to a flat 3.8, we built mechanisms within that to also help shift some of that money out to help alleviate any unforeseen burden that we may have, whether it's through the economy, whether it's through loss of revenue from the tax cut. So I know that people won't understand that or think through the answer that I'm about to give, but we planned on knowing that we were going to have a reduction in revenue as a potential short term, and that's why we prepared for it. So,
what do you think the Democrats are calling that using one-time money on ongoing expenses for 5 years? Address that.
Yeah, thanks for standing behind me again, Aaron. Keep in mind as we were having those conversations, I think there's a difference in having a conversation around one-time money when that's just a very small amount of money. When you're talking about $6 billion within a nearly $9 billion budget, while we understand that this is something that is the reduction in revenue does impact the budget, we felt we didn't just build a small pot of money that we could say would be one-time money. $6 billion overpayment to Iowans, we felt was too much for us to have. That's why we wanted to reduce the tax burden on Iowans, recognizing that some of these budget decisions we have to make will be impacted, but by no means are we in a position where we don't feel we can fund our priorities.
What's the status of SSA negotiations with the Senate?
Yeah, we continue the position from the House caucus as we talk about this when we go into the room and ask them, and I'm very clear with them that right now, been with the Senate as well as the governor, that the House feels very strongly about our package that we've had, and so we're hearing back from Iowans that they want us to continue to stand firm with our number, and that's pretty much been our position. Obviously, the 2.25 with some of those one-time funding as well, and some of the other operational sharing transportation pieces, we feel pretty strongly about, and we're hopeful that we can find some resolution to maybe incorporate some of those into an agreement. But at this point in time, the House feels pretty confident. But we're going to continue to stand strong for what we passed.
So how quickly could we see it?
It would just depend if there's a willingness from the other parties to want to negotiate within that. I've been very open that would love to have some feedback on some of those pieces within there. I think we recognize in a negotiation you may not get everything you want, but we also feel that we put enough things on the table that we're hopeful that some of those can be part of the conversation. So I don't see us in a position where this is like going to be rushing to the floor. If we get in a position where we can negotiate some of those other things, we'd love to be able to get this settled and give some certainty.
How some Senate Democratic leaders call this a disappointing week in their view, feeling that the House hasn't passed meaningful bills to lower the cost for Iowans? You've mentioned that the first funnel done, that now the focus moves to fiscal issues, budget issues, tax issues. Can you talk about going forward again what we might see from the caucus about trying to lower costs?
Yeah, and I think that some of the things that we're trying to do, and I think the bill that I led off with is a perfect example. While it may not specifically just lower costs, it is a concern that we've heard from Iowans and the impact that it's having in providing those services. So, like I said, having the bill that we passed earlier dealing with healthcare issues, as the tax conversation goes on, we look at one of those pressures as property tax. We know, as I shared with you guys, there's several bills that have been introduced that we're trying to get feedback. I've already been having meetings with groups, having meetings with the Senate to gather that feedback to see what we look like. We feel like that's one of the biggest pressures that Iowans are feeling, but I think you're going to continue to see us file some bills that I kind of touched on last week that we'd like to get filed and start moving through the process. That would help alleviate some of the tax costs that everyday Iowans face on some of the goods that they buy.
Kelly Garcia sent an email to her staff this week saying there's a hiring freeze for new positions across all of state government. Were you informed of that by the governor, and just what do you think of cracking down on creating new positions?
I think I'd want to have those conversations. I've not had a direct conversation. I'd have to ask my chairs of my committees. Obviously, I'm not involved in every single conversation that goes on at the committee level. But I think if as we're looking at that and wanting to continue to maintain keeping the cost of government in line, I'd want to have that conversation specifically for the rationale for that. But if it's something that we can still provide at the level of services that we are, and that needs to go in place, I think that's something that we'd be open to.
There's a bill that would reduce the size of the research activities tax credit if employers are laying off a certain number of workers. What are your thoughts on that bill? Is that a good idea?
Yeah, and I want to have more conversation. I'm aware of the bill. That's obviously, I think it's a bill that's introduced in Ways and Means.
Yes.
I think we've had several conversations, and I think we will around the R&D tax credit, realizing that's the largest tax credit that we have as a state. My position has always been that we should always be looking at these to make sure they're working the way that we intended, whether it's R&D tax credit or any of the other ones. So I would expect that to probably get a hearing within the House. I don't know what that will look like within the entirety. I know that the IDA has a bill as well, looking at some tax credits. So I don't know how that ties into that conversation, but I think we'd have a willingness to continue to engage and make sure that those tax credits are providing the service that we expect.
A lot of bills that come to the floor, they might not seem like huge, earth-shattering statewide news, but they're very important to some members of your caucus. Did you warn, or did Leader Winchell warn any members of your caucus that if they voted against the gender identity bill, that certain legislation that they really cared about either wouldn't get through the funnel or wouldn't be brought to the floor for debate?
And I think we have not operated that way in the caucus, and I don't know how much clearer I can be. We've had members running bills on the floor since we passed the gender identity bill. We've had bills who have passed on the floor who even voted against the bill, the gender identity bill. So I think that that's completely untrue. Anyone that's sharing that clearly doesn't know the dynamic of our caucus. But the caucus function and us getting our bills done should not be impacted by decisions that individuals make on bills. There's members that vote against just some bills that maybe aren't as significant on the floor. Our expectation, as long as they inform leadership of what they're doing, so we can make good decisions before we bring things to the floor, that's really our expectation as leadership from the caucus.
Besides the property tax bill and SSA funding, what other bill priorities do you guys have?
Yeah, I think you're going to see more conversation start to heat up around PBM conversation. The pharmacy benefit manager bill is out there. We have one on our side. The Senate has a bill on their side. I would say that. Obviously, the governor's energy bill that we have in the Ways and Means Committee, that has some processes to work through on different committees. So I think there's a lot of big bills that are kind of still sitting out there in addition to the ones you touched on. Plus, like I touched on over here with Steven, I think you got your IEDA bill that's looking at different tax credits. So we have some big pieces of legislation, I think, that are going to continue to see. But I think, like I said, the energy bill is one, for example, we want to continue to work through the process.
Thanks, everybody.
With the REC estimate, when should we see budget targets?
Oh, Steven, too early for me to get to that.
Appreciate it.
Oh, you know, all right, you guys have your microphone.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That's how we get the last question in.
Education it is today.